Good evening. This is Donna Blomquist, librarian at the LaSalle Public Library, welcoming you to tonight's virtual program, Undertaking a Big Garden Project, presented by Master Gardener Natalie Martin. Before we begin, though, just a reminder that our next virtual program is Twin Disasters, a presentation about the horrific and historic Peshtigo, Wisconsin fire, which was largely overshadowed by the Great Chicago Fire that occurred on the same day. We hope you can join us for that program. Twin Disasters on Tuesday, September 28th at 7 p.m., an hour later than our usual Tuesday programming. And with that, I'll stop sharing and turn this over to Natalie. Natalie, are you there?
Oh, I'm here now, unmuted. Here I am. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I know that we've been cooking a lot this whole summer, still summer. So thank you for joining me for a non-cooking program. I hope that it does okay. I hope that you're seeing not my inbox, but my actual presentation, because right now it's only showing me my inbox.
I see your opening title screen, Natalie.
Oh, good. Yay. It's working. You know me, it's always 50-50. Thank you so much for joining me today. What we're talking about is a big garden project. So something in your yard that's going to be a big undertaking, a transformation potentially, or a big investment. It doesn't always have to cost a lot of money, but usually a big project is either going to cost a lot of money, cost a lot of time, or both, potentially both. A lot of times you don't have to spend a lot of money because you maybe are able to transplant some plants. You could maybe get things like irises or hostas or things like that you can split from other people and plant in your yard. But you still do have to go through the work of planting it and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about what kind of a big garden project might look like. I did undertake my own big garden project this year. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I did and the process that I went through. And then I have another resource that I can show you that's like a professional one. For those of you that haven't met me before, I am Natalie Martin. I do educational programs for the Master Garden Program through the University of Illinois Extension. We'll talk about that towards the end. But we run the gamut of stuff. I've talked Donna into letting me do cooking classes in my office. So here we are at the end of end of the 2021, and I've cooked all sorts of things in this tiny space up here. But today we are diving back into gardening. So kind of when you think about your big garden project, you have to think about what your goal is. So when I did mine this year, I wanted to take my raised bed area and I wanted to, I think, triple it in size, double or triple it in size. But I wanted to make it, I wanted to be able to utilize all of it. I didn't want it to have any dead space. I wanted to have basically the exact amount of space that I needed that I was going to be able to use. So when you're thinking about a big project, think about what your goal is. Do you want your goal to be a new garden that is very low water? Do you want a garden that is going to be maybe like a rain garden area? We did talk about that. I have a picture of a rain garden. I'll show it in a little bit. Maybe you want a rain garden that can kind of capture maybe overflow water in your yard. Maybe you want to take up all of your grass in your front yard and go to no mow or something like that. So think about what your goal is and thinking, when you think about your goal, then you're going to have to try to find some inspiration, because the thing that I have learned is that if there's an idea that I have, someone on the internet already had it probably. So there's going to probably be an idea out there. You can, for example, what you see on your screen is a raised bed garden layout. So I've looked it up on Google, which is the image on the right. I think you're right. Yep. And then on the left I looked it up in Pinterest. And so there's going to be just links galore. And so you kind of go through, these are both image searches, and you can see kind of what your thoughts are. When I looked at raised beds, there's a million different kinds of raised beds out there, but I already had a whole bunch of lumber, because that was going to be the big cost, or one of the big costs is lumber for that project. So I had a bunch of lumber. So I knew I wanted to do wood. So then I knew I needed to look at wood raised beds further on down the road. But when you do look at those inspirations, there's going to be those just absolutely fantastic dream ideas out there that are not going to be realistic for you because they're going to either be too much of an undertaking, they're going to be too expensive, you can't find the supplies. So you really want to be realistic about what you're aiming for, when you're really thinking about that. Yeah, I would have loved to have big trellises and a gated area. That wasn't going to be in the cards for me. So when you're really thinking about big projects, make sure that you can think about what you can achieve. I mean, if you're hiring someone, shoot for the moon, right? Like, absolutely do what you want to do. But if you are doing it on your own, it is going to maybe be a little limiting. And then make a plan. This is a whole lot of words, but these are kind of things that I think about when I'm thinking about a project. Can it be all done at once? Is it a 1-day project? Is it a 2-weekend project? What's our timeline going to look like? Big, big important thing. How much will it cost? Do you have to budget for it? Is it kind of is it a low cost thing, high labor? Really kind of maybe think about how much you want to spend, or how much you're, if that's not an issue, then just kind of picking out the products. Should it be done in phases? Maybe if you are limited on your budget, you have to say, okay, first I'm going to take up all the sod, then I'm going, after 2 months, then I'm going to place the build the raised beds, and then 2 more months I'm going to buy the soil and fill the soil. So think about that, if it can be done in phases. Do you need any permits or permissions that are needed? Sometimes if you're putting in something like a patio, or really in-depth planter beds, raised things in your front yard, you're going to want to check with your city codes. You're going to want to check with your building inspector, just to make sure that you're not going to be you're not going to be needing an extra special permit. We built a deck this year, and we needed to check to make sure that it was okay with our building inspector, because again, that will also affect your tax code too. If it's an improvement, certain things will. Can you do it all by yourself? If there's in-depth digging or trenching that needs to be done, that might be something that you have to outsource to somebody else. So then you would have to contact some contractors potentially, or hire somebody, or a neighbor or something like that. So that's also going to affect your schedule. If you having a neighbor that's going to come help you, make sure that you're working around their schedule, and like maybe buying a couple pizzas or whatever your deal is. Free produce all summer, whatever it is. Call Julie. Julie is not the person that has the Bobcat. Julie is the person that's in charge of, or Julie is the organization that's in charge of marking all of your lines, so that if you are digging or trenching, or some lines aren't even really that deep. So making sure that you know exactly where those electrical, water lines, everything like that is. And it's a free service. You don't have to pay anything. So I think it's 711 around here. But call Julie. If you don't know the number, Google it up, and they will come out and mark it, and make sure that sometimes it's a better safe than sorry kind of a thing. And then follow your plan. You want to make sure that once you're in the middle of your project, you're not like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, because there's a reason that you made the plan. So yeah, it might be nice, and you could change the plan. But following the plan is important. And I am super guilty of this, because I see shiny things all the time and want to get distracted. So making sure that you are following the plan, so that you're not incurring more of a cost than you want to, that you have all the supplies that you need, that you don't get, you don't take a left turn at Albuquerque, and all of a sudden you're over here, and that's not going to work because you had to call this or this building code, or your power lines are actually there, things like that. So make sure that you're following your plan, so that way your project has the best chance of success. Now, absolutely, if you're in the middle of a project and it's not going to end, it's something changes, always reassessing the plan makes sense. Absolutely. So here's a couple examples of big garden projects. This is actually my house right after we moved in. And if we talked about, if you were in our rain gardens program, or maybe even transformation gardening, I might have talked about this in both of those. But if you look at the picture on the left, you can see that we had serious drainage problems. My whole neighborhood actually has very serious water drainage problems. We're pretty sure that just the houses were built below the level they needed to be built up before the foundations were put in, and they just weren't. Um, and you can see in this picture, my neighbor's yard is slanted. And so all of his yard water pools right next to my water. Now, the left-hand picture is actually after we had our yard graded. So we already had made a change. So what would happen in our house, and I'll use my cursor so that you can maybe see it a little better. Right here are 2 window wells, and the water would build up here and flow into the window wells, fill up, and then fill up our basement. Not fill up our basement, but flow into our basement. So we had to take this whole area, grade it, and then if you look, grade it so that it was built up a little higher towards the house. We were limited because you can only go so high. And then in this picture over here, you can see we ran this drain out a little farther away. Now, eventually, I am going to be putting a rain garden out where that flows out by the road. So rain garden is you dig down, so it's slanted, and you have some sort of catch area with gravel and rock. And then you have plants that go on top of it that are water loving plants that will just soak that water right up. So even after, 12, 24 hours, pooled water will just disappear. It's really kind of fantastic. So what I've done for now, and you can see it in this picture we've already started, is all along here, and I've extended it out about here now, are prairie plants. It's a pollinator garden now. So this is, I started with some gladiolus and stuff like that, but I have extended it out. I have all sorts of chicory and bachelor's buttons and milkweed here now. And those really help soak up that water and keep that water away from my foundation. So gardening, it can be beneficial as well as beautiful, just throwing it out there. So this is an example, and this was a project that we did have to call a contractor. We did have to call Julie and make sure that we knew where our lines were. And we did some of the stuff on our own because after they came out and graded, obviously you can see in this picture, it still wasn't fabulous. So we ended up extending that drainage pipe out, and we had to dig kind of almost like a trench between the water also would pool behind my house here. And then we had to dig a kind of a pass through area where the water would flow out towards the road this way. So we actually haven't had water in our basement in 2 years now, which has been really nice. In this picture, this is actually a rendering, but this is 2 samples of rain gardens that people had been putting in. And these are water loving plants like we talked about with the rain garden. Looks like we might have a Q&A in the Sarah asked if we did a rain garden talk, and Donna can jump on and correct me, but there should be a recording of that rain garden presentation on the LaSalle County website under past presentations or past programs, but looks like she's talking right now about that. So in this picture, there's 2 things. So the point of a rain garden is that you take that water that's coming, there's a bunch of purposes, but the number 1 purpose of a rain garden is to stop water runoff from your roof and areas like that, and stop it from running into your drain and keeping that water in your land, in your area here, because roofs are dirty, streets are dirty. So if that water runs off your roof, runs down your driveway, runs down the street and into the storm drain, all of that debris and muck and yuck is going right into your storm drain and potentially into your water systems. So rain gardens really help. It also helps with erosion because it's not pulling all that dirt out of your yard and rushing it down the street into the storm drain. They're specifically planned to hold the water and channel it into specific areas. So in this first picture here, there's 2 sections. The water would come down this downspout and come into this area. Now, a lot of people put their rain gardens farther away from their house because, just like me, they don't want their water pooling up even temporarily near their house. So so then in the second picture over here, the water would come and there would be some sort of informal, by informal I mean maybe like a divot that's then covered in grass, so the water would run in that divot. Sometimes they're made of rock. Sometimes they have the water run underground from the downspout out through like a drainage pipe into this area here. I'm doing a combination of hand motions and using my cursor, so I'm sorry if that's hard for people to to keep up with. Um, but I talk with my hands a lot, and I'm surprised I didn't spill anything during cooking programs. So the use of this would be to keep that water from leaving the yard and going down to the street. So you can see that this was part of a plan. Somebody contacted this organization, said, hey, I want to put in a rain garden. They said, yes, here's two different options. And there's going to be costs associated with both of those things. So it's just another example of a big garden project. So we're going to go to my garden. Here is my garden 2 years ago. This would have been my planting season of 2019. Yes? No, 2020. This is 2020, beginning of 2020. So I have 5 raised beds and some blueberry bushes. And then over here in this area, I have 2 more small raised beds that we grow things like grapes and things like that. We also have, we must not have put it in yet at that season, but we have a vertical garden here where we grow things like herbs and stuff like that. So this was great, but it wasn't quite big enough for what we wanted to do. I wanted to double the amount of tomatoes I could grow. As you can see, this is full of strawberries, and that was getting filled up. So we wanted to have a space where we could expand our strawberry patch with all the daughters that were growing off of this main strawberry plant. So we wanted to have that was at least 2. So I put one here, and then I was like, well, what about all the things that we didn't get to grow? We grew some carrots in 2020, but we're in a shallow raised bed, and I wanted a deeper one so we could grow even bigger carrots. So I wanted to build 2 deep raised beds that we could grow things like carrots and root vegetables, turnips and radishes, and beets, things like that. So we had a bunch of different uses and different styles of raised beds that we were looking to grow. So this was the before picture. And then at the beginning of 2021, like in January, when I start planning my garden, I start thinking about, that's when I usually look at what my seeds are that I want, things like that. I will say, okay, here's all the things I want to grow. And I made a list. Here's everything I want to grow. Here's the space it takes up. And then I started to draw it out. And I actually looked for this drawing today, and it has been lost to the world, because when I was doing my plantings, I had it outside with me, got dirty and ripped and all that stuff. So I'm pretty sure it's gone. But I basically took it and drew a scaled on graph paper, a scaled drawing of what I had out there already and where I wanted the new ones to grow. So to grow and go. It was nice. That was an unintentional pun. So then after I did that and I literally drew in how big the plants were and how much space they would have to take. Then I brought in my contractor, which is my husband. And I said, how feasible is this? What do we have to do? And then the other thing that I wanted to do was remove all of this grass, because when you have grass that grows right up next to your raised beds, you have a better chance of weeds and grass growing into it. You have a better chance of pests because they have just a thoroughfare right into they can walk all along the grass and right into your planter bed. So I wanted to put in some mulch or something like that. So what we started to do was explore some options. We knew number one, we were going to have to take out all the sod that was in there. And that's its own big project, because that means we rented a sod cutter, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So rent a sod cutter, and then all the labor that's involved with removing that sod. If you've ever removed sod, it is so heavy and it is so cumbersome. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about the logistics of all of that too. But so we knew we wanted to remove the sod. That meant we had to buy landscape fabric and then some sort of substrate to go on top. We talked about gravel. We talked about mulch. We are eventually going to probably move out of this house. So we thought that mulch was the best idea as far as resale value, because it's easier to decomposes. People could easily just pull that up and reseed and have it be almost like it wasn't there. And then we were going to have to build our raised beds and then fill in all of those raised beds, new and old, with new soil matter. So I mix my own compost, mix my own soil. So I do a combination of peat moss, soil, compost, and then vermiculite, which is like a drainage medium. So we needed to buy all of the stuff that was going to go into that to make that. So that was kind of where my plan started was, okay, I know I want to do this. This is how much space I need. And then we had to start making the plans for doing all the construction. We did not think it was going to be feasible for us to get it done in one weekend. We said this is going to be probably a 2-weekend project because we're going to have to rip the sod. We're going to have to remove the sod, build the boxes, and then fill the bins, fill the beds. Now my husband did make the boxes ahead of time because in the winter, because he could make it in the shop downstairs, and he made them so that they kind of just pop together. So all he had to do is bring the wood out and pop them together outside. So we could do that part a little bit ahead of time. But we then had to make plans for sod cutter, mulch deliveries. So we did get a bunch of topsoil. I'm not happy with the kind, otherwise I would give you the recommendation, but I also don't want to blast a negative review on this program. So we did buy like a bulk topsoil, but it wasn't the quality that I would have wanted. So, or we bought, it was bulk compost. So I don't want to trash talk anybody, but so I'll kind of break down. I have tons of pictures to show you. So the first thing we had to do was start ripping the sod. We left the old beds in place. And as you can see, they had already, what happens with raised beds with any garden is that the soil compacts over time and you lose nutrients, it leaches out the bottom. So we knew we were going to have to add soil to those, compost in a whole mix. So we were going to mix a whole bunch of it and then add it to the beds later on. So we had to first rip up the sod, and the way that sod rippers work, they just go right. They have a blade that cuts down in it, and then it runs along underneath it, on just like about 1 inch or 2 inches down. It runs along underneath it, and then you can follow behind and roll it up. Now, when these are rolled up, it is so heavy that you had to then do it in little sections. So we had to, we could only do like 6 feet, 10 feet at a time. To cut it and then roll it up. So we had tons and tons of these rolls, which we did not. This was not part of our original plan. And so I'll show you what we ended up having to do with it at the end of it. But that was our first thing that happened when we started cutting. We were like, why didn't we make a plan for all this sod? Because it's all in our backyard and we had to get it out to the front. And then then we were like, okay, well, once you get it to the front, what do you do with it? So you can see this is only about, we have been going at it for a few hours, but we still, this is only about half of the sod removed. And we had all of these rolls that we had to figure out what to do with. So you can see we got all of the sod ripped up. We had to go through and kind of get rid of all these little clumps and bumps here so that was nice and flat, because even if you put mulch on top of it, you want to make sure it's nice and even so you're not tripping, so it's as accessible as possible, things like that. So we went through and removed all those little bumps. We left some grass. The reason we left grass all around out here is because we had a nest of bunnies that was in there and we didn't know what to do, so we just left that grass there forever so the bunnies wouldn't have to be moved and they could just live forever in that spot. Oh, there's my dog. I don't remember. Oh, so this would be all cleaned up. You can kind of see it all around. We left an edge all along here that our original plan was that we were going to go through and spray it with like plant killer. And we decided not to do that just because we have baby bunnies and we have little kids and dogs. So we just go through with a weed eater and take it down to the bottom instead of that. So then we had to lay a whole bunch of landscape fabric and we had to go out. One thing I am not good at is math. And so I miscalculated 2 different times how much landscape fabric we needed. So we had to run back to the store for landscape fabric 2 different times. Now there's a bunch of different levels of landscape fabric. You can get the really thin stuff that's more water permeable. We ended up going with the thicker stuff, so it's a bigger weed barrier. But the thing that we found out later is that because it doesn't drain well, sometimes water will sit in those areas and it gets kind of muddy, slimy around our raised beds. It ends up draining over time. It's usually fine, but it did get hit a couple times this year. We did have standing water in and among the raised beds when we had that really rainy June. So we had to go through and lay all this landscape fabric. You don't have to do landscape fabric. You just have a higher probability of plants pushing up through your mulch. But so it is one of those steps that while it is tedious, it definitely, I think, will be worth it in the end. You'll see I have a current picture, so you can see that this is not a perfect system. We did get weeds, but so then we started laying our landscape beds. These are 6-inch beds, and we also did 12-inch beds. Actually, these are more maybe 4-inch. And then we had some like 12-inch or 8-inch or something like that. Again, math's not my strong suit. So we had to lay all those out, make sure they were even. I did measure and chalk where they should go because we wanted it to look kind of nice. You know what I mean? Again, we wanted it to be functional and kind of fashionable at the same time. Form and function, that's what I was looking for. So that's my husband. So yeah, so then you can see we got all our beds in, and we did these double beds for things like root vegetables, and then we had to bring in our soil. So what we did was we had a big truck come and deliver our compost and put it on our driveway. We had it laid on a tarp so that it didn't stain everything. So we had it laid on our driveway, and then we had to bring wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of that compost that back to the back, and we mixed it with the vermiculite and the peat moss. You can see this is peat moss here. We mixed it in the bed. So we took rakes and hose and things like that and mixed it all around in here, and then added it to the extra beds back there. And then we had to fill it with mulch. And if you're wondering if I bought the right amount of mulch, I sure did not, because mulch is really hard to calculate. And it's you have to base it on a couple of different things. When you buy mulch, you're going to think about how deep you want the layer of mulch to be. Mulch will compact, it will wash away, it will rot. So you may want to start with a thicker couple inch layer of mulch, sometimes even up to 6 inches. I think that's probably what we should have done because a lot of it has washed away. But and then you have to multiply it with the area, but then also the depth. So I bought, like, as you can see by this picture, not enough. And we had to then wait a full another week or more to get more mulch dropped off again. And then I bought too much mulch the second time. So then I had extra mulch sitting in my driveway for a while while we could figure out what to do with it. So yes, then we went around and added all this mulch. Again, you could go through and put edging on it. You could put a fence around it. That wasn't in our budget, and it wasn't necessarily something that we considered a priority. So we did not add that on. Now, we did have lots of rabbits come in and out, and we have, even with my dog, they will still come in and they can get into these shallow raised beds here. So we ended up putting wire fencing around these to keep rabbits out. So potentially a big whole fence around the whole thing might have been good. There's a lot of other options that we could have done. And then this is it all filled in. If you're wondering why I have ghost beds, that's because I don't know if you remember, but we had that late frost back in, I don't know what it was, May maybe, that we got that late hard frost. So we put these like clear tarps over the top so that it would help keep it warm. It worked okay. We had a couple of things make it. And then this is our really scraggly looking beds. You can see we do have some weeds coming up. We have a maple tree that threw lots of whirligigs, and so we had little tiny maples coming up all around the whole thing, across the whole all the mulch. But we did grow tons of tomatoes here. Here's our peppers. We have leeks and some lettuces here. This bed back here ended up not really making much. But then this one was, again, tomatoes and eggplants. Strawberries here. This one is ground cherries, butternut squash. And then we have already harvested all of our carrots and radishes and beets for this year. And I had big plans to add something else in there, but it did not happen. And then we moved all of our pots and stuff over here so that our sprinkler could get it. So we've got some chives and lemongrass and herbs on the walls here and stuff like that. So it's a little scraggly, but it has lasted the whole season. It's pretty functional. You're able to walk nicely between the beds. I'm pretty happy with it, and I'm pretty happy with kind of how it turned out. But we did follow that plan. We did make some mistakes. And like I said, we had all that sod. So this is what we ended up like when we had we had this giant mountain of sod here. We laid some of it all along the edge here, but we had this big mountain of sod. So we had the idea to turn it into a pond. We found for free on Facebook Marketplace a pond liner. And so we then started to shape this pile of sod so that would have a berm. And again, we did that instead of digging down into the ground, we wanted to build it on top. So if somebody bought our house and they didn't like that there was a pond there, they could easily, I mean, maybe not easily, but it would be a lot easier to get rid of it than if there was a big hole dug in the ground. So we kind of had to shape this sod pile and dig a hole down in, and then lay the bed in. And then we went and got some grasses. We have fish in there now. There's some fish. We have a filter system. We planted these grasses all along. So this is maybe midsummer. And then this is kind of how it's filled up. This is my wild kitten who is in among there, but we have all these grasses that have grown up, and you kind of birds come down to our filter here and sit on the edge, and they'll like drink water out of it. And we have frogs in there now, so it's a cool thing for my kids. But we were able to do this because we had all that sod. We kind of had the idea to do it, so it kind of was like a making lemonade with lemons kind of situation. But yeah, we had all this sod that we had to figure out what to do with. So what projects you guys can feel free to ask questions if you want, or let me know what projects you're planning. This is kind of the perfect time of year to kind of look at your garden, look at it with a critical eye and say, this is what would make it more functional, enjoyable. This would solve this problem. This is the time of year when you can start planning it. You can start budgeting for it, because you might not need to put it into effect until next summer, maybe next spring, summer. But if you start planning it in April, it's almost kind of too late, because you want to make sure that you have everything in place. You have extra help if needed. You have exactly what you want done, so that you're not kind of rushing to get it done once the growing season starts. You can absolutely start doing stuff in the fall. If we had gone and dug up all that sod, first of all, don't rent a sod cutter in spring. That's when everyone's renting a sod cutter. It was absolutely hard to find. That was our limiting factor on when we could do our project. So that's definitely something like using the season to your help, to your aid is really helpful in that. You could start cutting the sod now, and then putting your landscape fabric and stuff down now. That's a potential option if you were me doing that project. If you're doing, now is a great time to plant some native perennials. I'm actually picking up this weekend from the McHenry County Land Conservancy some native plugs, because we can get them in the fall, and some seeds you even have to plant in the fall, so that they have that cold winter to kind of jumpstart themselves. So native plants are a great thing to think about planting right now. Trees and shrubs you can plant right now. So maybe take a look at your area that you have, and figure out a way that you can make it work for you. If you are going to have to budget for something, this is the perfect time to kind of start planning it, so that maybe you have that money and those things saved and in place by the time spring happens. I would say that our project, boy, do I wish I looked this up ahead of time, because we've spent a couple $100s on just compost and mulch alone, and then probably $100 on renting the sod ripper. We didn't have to pay for the lumber because we had it, thankfully. But all of those, mulch, soil, things like that, that's not even plants, and you already have, a couple $100s spent. I would say we probably spent $1,500 total on the project, just to get those raised beds in. Now we were able to grow more and save more money on produce because of that, which is nice. So you do make some of that money back. But you have to think about that. You have to think about the cost and benefit analysis. Now, a lot of gardening projects, unfortunately, you don't get that money back with you, back to you. You get the enjoyment and those like non-monetary benefits back, but you don't get that money back a lot of times. So you got to kind of think about that when you're planning your garden stuff. But planning over winter is when I do a lot of my aspirational garden planning, when I'm thinking about, oh, maybe next year I'll try to grow that really weird variety of eggplant I didn't, or whatever. But as I was telling Donna before this started, I'm really the one that eats a lot of the produce around here. So when I'm thinking about what we're growing, I'm thinking about things like tomatoes. I'm thinking about peppers that we can use for cooking, things that we can put up for the winter, because my kids are not big. They'll eat fruits and vegetables, but it's not a variety of vegetables. They'll eat carrots. So we grew a lot of carrots this year. They'll eat tomato sauce. So we grew a lot of tomatoes. But this last year was when I was like, oh, I'm going to try ground cherries, because that's a native fruit. They have grown, natively in the United States. So I want to try to grow that, because that's a cool fruit that I can grow myself. And then we made ground cherry compote on our cooking from your garden program. So we've been able to do some really cool stuff with the new stuff that we grew. So we did get those benefits back. But it's not gonna pay for itself. You know what I mean? Something like a rain garden, though, if you're somebody that gets a lot of water in your basement, that financially can benefit you, because you are directing that water away from your foundation, away from your basement, which can help save you money if you're constantly having to, have your basement serviced, if you're spending time, or things get damaged when water gets in your basement. That's something that's really important to kind of think about, that it really could be some actual physical benefits. One of the things that we might do a program on later is kind of changing your yard to a no mow. So we can kind of cover that in that program, if that's something that, if you want to get rid of some of that yard space, save on labor, you don't want to have to mow your lawn every week. You save on, fertilizers and things like that. And it helps the environment too. So we can talk about that in a future program. Did anybody have, I'm kind of fast today. It's not as no cooking. So I'm just talking, but did anybody have any questions before I talk about Master Gardener program a little bit?
While we're waiting for everyone else to write their questions, I'll
Yes.
ask a couple.
Of course.
I was looking at your flexible tubing coming from your gutter in that one picture, and how you ran it out to your front yard where your rain garden was.
Yeah.
Now, did you put your flexible hose underground and then have it kind of go into a pool where the gravel was?
That's what I will do. Yeah. So this right now, it's still out on the surface, because we just didn't have the ability to do that right now, because it's a little bit more labor intensive than we were hoping for. So that is what we will do, is bury it under the ground and then have it on a slow, like a slow, gentle slope. You don't want it to be too fast, because you have a longer area. You want to get it far away, but we have a gentle slope so that water doesn't sit in that pipe and stagnate and have things build up. So you want to keep it at a gentle slope. So when you do your trenching, you want to just use a level and slowly slope it all the way to your catch area. And your catch area is going to be sand at the bottom, then smaller gravel, then larger gravel up to river rock, and then your plants and stuff on top of it, so that it can kind of drain down and filter out those toxins as it gets farther down. You want to have your finest filter at the bottom, because if you have your finest filter at the top, it's not going to drain fast enough, and it'll clog.
So Natalie, so where the water outflows from the tubing,
yes,
is that right beneath ground level? I mean, literally right beneath ground level, or by that time, is it several inches underneath the surface?
It's right now, it's right beneath ground level. So we just have enough slope to keep that water moving. So in a rain garden, so that's in my house right now, but in a rain garden, it would probably go, right below ground level. You don't want to see the pipe. It would come out right below. It wouldn't be protruding up above the ground in any way.
Okay. Looks like Sarah has a question for you.
Yes. Hold on.
Have you considered using rain collectors?
Oh, like a rain barrel. I'm cheap. So I haven't bought any. They're sometimes about $100, $75, $100, depending on where you buy them from. But if you buy them from your local land conservancy or your soil and water conservation district, that money does go to them. So that's a great opportunity to help support a local organization. So rain barrels absolutely are great. And we used to have one at our old house. The big deal is if you do not buy a commercial one, or when you're making your own, they are huge mosquito nesting sites. If you nesting, whatever, egg laying, whatever you want to call it. So if you don't keep a very fine mesh over them, they're going to get tons of mosquitoes. So if you buy a commercial one, they have that built into them. That top area where your drain pipe comes in is great. We get so much rain in the summer during our rainy season that it overflows a regular size commercial basin. So, and at that time of year, you're not using it to water your plants or anything like that. So that's why we haven't gotten one in this specific spot, because it just gets too much. We could get a bigger system, but we haven't figured out what that is yet. So it's absolutely a great idea. And if you have the ability to do it and you're not really cheap like me, it's the perfect solution for something like that. We just get too much rain because this gutter system is the whole back side of our house. So the whole backside runs to this one gutter system. It's not perfectly designed in any way. It just all flows right to that spot. Donna, you got another one for me?
I do.
Great.
Building off of your, you know how I always do.
I know.
Building off of your no mow idea, and I know we've talked about that in the past, and we want to do more programs in the future on it. I've got several eyesores in my property that I would like to use the no mow function to add some kind of, landscaping that would conceal, these two
Like an
eyesores.
LP tank, for example, would be.
That would be the
something
one
like
that's in my front yard.
you know what? Concealing an LP tank, but still allowing it to be accessible is like a big gardening thing.
Nightmare.
There are so many, because you still need to access it. You can't just grow shrubs around it because you need to make sure that people can get to it. So I totally get it. Absolutely. You can pick grasses, things like that. The thing you just want to pay attention to is their maximum height, because you are going to want to cover that height. You want to have it conceal your LP tank, but you still want the guy to be able to get over the top and access if your nozzles are on the top, usually they are. You still want them to get over the top. So you can really just maximize if you look at the grasses, you can maximize your money, because some grasses will grow 10 feet tall, some of the decorative grasses, things like that, but some will only be 3 to 4 feet tall. So that might be everything you need. The maximum height they're going to get is the maximum height you need. So plant those around it and then have some shorter things in front of them, and they'll grow together and make this really nice screen. And you can add maybe a couple pavers or something in one area so that your LP guy can still access it. But they would still be concealed enough that it would look nice and you wouldn't see your LP tank all the time. But yeah, that's a great example of something that people, want to hide, or maybe it's their well cap that sticks up out of the ground. They have to mow around it all the time. They're constantly replacing their caps because they're hitting it with their mower. That happens a lot. Sometimes folks have a septic access that they want to keep access to, but it's an eyesore, things like that. So you can kind of make a planting area, but with a little bit of an access so you can still get to it easily, but it's not visible from your house or wherever. If you're in the country, you aren't worried about people driving by seeing it, but if you're looking out your window, you don't want to see it all the time.
Well, you've covered all three of mine.
I used to live in the country too, Donna. Can you tell?
I was, and all of my Julie lines go right past the well. So that compounds the problem.
Absolutely. But you could get some shallow rooting grasses and stuff like that. Prairie drop seed is a good example of a taller growing grass that's native, that will expand itself a little bit. Like it will build over time. And then it will get tall enough that it would conceal some of that stuff.
Looks like Sarah has something for us.
Sarah, you're doing a great job today. I appreciate it. If I were interested in creating a native prairie, will that take at least as much prep work as starting a vegetable garden to remove the grass and sod? So if you want to remove the sod, yes, it's still going to be just as labor intensive at that beginning as it would be, but you wouldn't necessarily have to put down all that mulch and that landscape fabric, because you can put your native stuff. You might have to do some weeding, not wheat, but weeding, as in pulling weeds the first couple seasons, until those native plants take over. But eventually they will establish a community all themselves. You might have some non-natives, things like dandelions, things like that growing up in there, but dandelions are pollinator plants too. So and I think they're native, aren't they? Can't remember. But as long as you're not too picky about weeds, you don't have to worry about that mulch and that landscape fabric. You can kind of use even seeds pretty inexpensively. You can use seeds to plant that area. So you would still have to remove the sod. You'd probably want to till it up a little bit. I didn't have to till my area because I was just putting stuff on top of it. I wasn't digging down into the soil. But if you live in an area like me, ours is with that construction development area, everything's very compacted, and it's a backyard. So you're running and you're riding lawnmowers on it and things like that. So it's very compacted over time. So you might have to rake or till or things like that, but eventually native plants take care of themselves. They are so generationally important because that first thing that you plant will grow, and then the plant replant itself, and that root system will loosen up the soil to allow water and things to drain through it. So eventually, as it will loosen itself up as the plants grow, because they just know what to do. They're so smart. But absolutely, that sod part stinks. It stinks so bad. And it's right at the beginning, but thankfully it's right at the beginning when you're super gung-ho about getting that project done. If it was at the end, oh man, you'd be so over it. But it will probably be just as much work to get that native area started, just with that sod removal. Okay. If anybody is interested in a little bit more information about the Master Gardener program, I've got a couple slides in the back here. Sorry to go on this wild ride through my presentation. If anyone is interested in the Master Gardener program, they're always taking new volunteers. You can do presentations like this, or if you don't want to talk in front of people, you can do projects where you go out and help maintain garden areas, things like that. All you have to do is take a test and put in some volunteer hours, and you can be a Master Gardener too. Our office is based in Ottawa. You can contact, it's actually not Meg right now, it's Barb Craig over there, and she can get you information about taking the test. It's all online right now. There will be in-person classes eventually, but right now it's all online. And we've got a great program. There's also a Master Naturalist program that is all basically, I think of Master Gardener program are things that you're growing on purpose, and Master Naturalist is things that grow on their own. So things that are native to Illinois, plants and animals. Both those programs are amazing and provide a lot of services to the community. So if you are interested at all, definitely go ahead and contact Barb over there. Otherwise, thank you for joining me, everybody.
Natalie, this has been marvelous as always. It just makes my head spin about all the things I have to do, but I can start, maybe with my LP tank.
Yeah, you can rip up the sod around it or the grass around it, and you can start to seed some stuff this fall if you wanted to, and see what happens. I just bought a whole bunch of plugs. I think I mentioned that from the McHenry County Land Conservancy, and so I 60 not 60, maybe like 40 plant plugs, Illinois native plants.
Was that a pre-order?
Yeah, it was a pre-order, and I'll pick them up this weekend. So
yeah,
and a lot of different land conservancies and soil and water districts do that kind of stuff in the area. So this is the time of year when those are running. So kind of keep your eyes out for those kind of sales.
I remove the sod in a pleasing kind of configuration. Then I put the plugs in. Then I make some kind of a barrier around it with some kind of
For the
brick.
deer, yep.
Um,
But, oh, I'm sorry, barrier around it for what? I'm sorry.
not really a barrier, but like a walkway or something, so that
Oh,
when the LP guy backs up to it, he knows to stop there and don't just keep going.
yeah.
And
And I think once the plants grow, he would get it. You know what I mean? It's just that first time,
Yeah.
that when it's new, that he would probably, you could probably even put a little like, hey, I'm a native plant plot, pollinators, don't
Yeah.
drive on
Yeah, I could
me.
put a cute little sign in it,
Yeah.
I'm sure. And don't worry about my deer. They're they're so well fed on my yard that I don't think they'd even want the native grasses.
Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of, you can look them up. I know Akana Nursery has made that list for me before, of natives that are deer resistant, things like that. Or if you're looking at a list of plants, you can Google them and it'll tell you whether they're deer resistant. Bee balm is an example of a native that flowers and gets kind of tall and the deer don't like it. So there's some good options there.
And who was your source on that?
Akana Nursery up in Mendota has made native plant lists for me
Okay.
before, and you can order directly through them.
Okay, we will put them in the notes that go
Oh,
with your
perfect. Yep.
program archive too.
Absolutely.
Okay, Natalie, well, thank you very much again. I'm sure it's got
Bet.
everybody wanting to get out there.
Yep.
Start
And then I
planting.
think we'll be back for composting in October. Is that true?
We will be back for composting, and I have that too. So
I
as
will
you
be
know.
bringing live worms.
Oh, good.
So don't worry, everybody.
That's good. I love the multi-use of your office.
Worms, chicken broth. You just never know up here,
No, you really don't. It's always a surprise. Thank you again, Natalie.
No
And
problem.
thank you all for joining us tonight. Good
Have
night.
a good night, everybody.